August 17, 1943. A pale dawn spreads over occupied Europe, its light catching thin ribbons of frost drifting across the upper atmosphere. Far above the clouds, the steady thunder of radial engines grows louder, dozens of US B-17 flying fortresses pushing east in tight formation, their silver fuselages glinting in the rising sun. Below, German radar operators track the widening trail of contrails. Recognizing the pattern immediately, a massive deep strike raid, farther than the Americans have dared to go before. Luftwaffe pilots scramble toward their aircraft, unaware that the skies ahead will soon be carved open by hundreds of converging .50 caliber guns, firepower dense enough to shock even the most hardened veterans. And this moment had been building for months. By mid-1943, the air war over Europe had reached a critical threshold. The Allies believed that victory depended on crippling Germany's industrial heart, and the U.S. 8th Air Force embraced a bold doctrine: precision daylight bombing. Unlike the RAF, which struck cities at night, American commanders argued that tightly coordinated bomber formations could fight their way to targets in full daylight and deliver accurate blows against factories, ball-bearing plants, and aircraft works. Germany, however, had built a formidable defensive system. Radar stations along the coast tracked incoming aircraft with increasing accuracy, guiding fighter wings from multiple airfields. Flak batteries ringed industrial centers, creating deadly corridors of steel through which any bomber would have to pass. The Luftwaffe's twin-engine Zerster units and agile single-seat fighters Bf-109s and Fw-190s waited in layered formations to tear apart unescorted bombers. Still, American planners believed their B-17s could endure the gauntlet. With armor plating, self-sealing fuel tanks, and a network of machine gun turrets, the Flying Fortress was designed to take punishment and return home. But deep penetrations into German airspace were rare, and each raid pushed the limits of endurance and coordination. By late summer, one target had moved to the top of the priority list, one whose destruction could cripple the German war machine. The cities of Regensburg and Schweinfurt held particular significance for Allied planners. Regensburg housed major Messerschmitt production lines, where Bf-109 fighters, the backbone of the Luftwaffe, were built and assembled. Schweinfurt, farther north, contained Germany's critical ball-bearing factories. Without ball bearings, aircraft production, tank assembly, and vehicle maintenance would all falter. A successful strike against both cities could slow or even paralyze German industry. The plan was ambitious. The massive bomber forces would depart England, cross the Channel, and penetrate deep into German territory. One wing would strike Regensburg, then continue south toward bases in North Africa. The other would hit Schweinfurt before returning to England. But the operation required near-perfect timing. If the formations drifted apart or whether delayed their departure, they risked facing the full weight of the Luftwaffe separately. German intelligence had sensed an escalation in Allied operations. More radar activity, larger formations, and increasing pressure along the French coast indicated a major offensive was imminent. Fighter units stood ready, and the defenders believed they understood the rhythms of American raids. What they did not anticipate was how the B-17 combat box, rigid, disciplined, and bristling with synchronized firepower, would transform the sky into a furnace of steel and tracer fire. That transformation begins with the people, the machines, and the doctrines that shape this mission. Before sunrise on English airfields, B-17 crews prepared for what they knew would be one of the most dangerous missions of the war. Ground frost clung to the metal skin of the bombers as mechanics performed final checks under dim lights. Pilots studied their route hours over enemy territory, little chance of diversion, and no long-range escorts for most of the journey. Gunners loaded belts of .50 caliber ammunition, securing them in waist positions, top turrets, and chin mounts. For many crews, this would be their first deep strike. For others, another entry in a tour where survival was never guaranteed. Each man understood that discipline and formation integrity were their lifeline. The B-17 Flying Fortress embodied American daylight bombing doctrine. Its armor plating protected vital systems, its self-sealing tanks reduced the risk of fire, and its heavy defensive armament created overlapping fields of fire. But its true strength emerged when flown in formation. The combat box was designed to maximize mutual protection, three plane elements merging into larger groups, stacked at different altitudes and staggered laterally. This rigid structure transformed dozens of bombers into a single defensive organism, each turret covering blind spots of others. When operating properly, the formation projected a wall of fire dense enough to force German fighters to break off or approach at great risk. On the ground, Luftwaffe pilots studied intelligence briefings predicting heavy bomber activity. Many veterans had already fought the B-17s and respected their resilience. Others believed concentrated attacks could overwhelm the formations. When the first radar reports appeared that morning, multiple large groups crossing the channel, the reaction was immediate. Fighter groups scrambled from bases across France and Germany. As they climbed into the thin air, pilots spotted the approaching bombers as a long, glinting column. Even seasoned aviators felt a moment of hesitation. The formations looked immovable, layered in altitude and bristling with guns. Attacking them meant entering a storm of tracers where a single miscalculation could be fatal. These angles converge as the formations push deeper into German airspace, tightening their structure for the battle ahead. Deep inside German airspace, the success of the mission depended on one principle: maintain the combat box at all costs. Pilots kept their throttles steady, holding precise altitude and spacing even under fire. Breaking formation meant exposing the entire group to gaps in the defensive screen. German tactics relied on exploiting such moments. Fighters attacked from above and ahead, diving through the formation at high speed. Others struck from the rear, attempting to concentrate fire on a single bomber. But the American formations countered with disciplined geometry, each turret intersecting arcs with the next. Waist gunners called out enemy positions, top turret gunners tracked diving fighters, and the entire formation responded as one. At the operational level, the raid represented a calculated risk. U.S. commanders believed destroying both targets would justify the high probability of losses. They knew that a long-range escort like the P-51 was still months away from widespread deployment, meaning the bombers would face the Luftwaffe largely alone. Meanwhile, German commanders had prepared layered interception plans, confident that fatigue and attrition would wear down the American bombers before they reached their targets. Yet both sides faced uncertainties: weather, timing, and the unpredictable dynamics of air combat could shift the balance within minutes. Leadership now depended on timely decisions made in the cockpit and command posts alike. Striking ball-bearing plants and fighter factories carried enormous strategic weight, but also profound moral weight. Precision bombing in daylight aimed to limit civilian casualties, yet every raid risked collateral damage. American crews trained for accuracy, knowing each bomb dropped carried consequences beyond the battlefield. For German workers on the ground, alarms and explosions had become part of daily life, reflecting a war that no longer remained distant. Both sides lived within the expanding reach of industrial warfare, where technology and strategy intertwined with human cost. With these angles defined, the tension tightened. The formations pressed toward their targets, the Luftwaffe closed from all directions, and the sky prepared to erupt in fire. 920 hours. The first German fighters appeared high above the horizon, small dark specks descending with controlled aggression. The B-17 formations tightened instinctively, each bomber locking into its precise slot. Engines droned in synchronized rhythm, their contrails merging into a broad white corridor stretching across the sky. Below, the ground fell away into a patchwork of fields and towns, unaware of the storm approaching overhead. Moments later, the first attack began. FW-190s from Jagdgeschwader 26 dove from above, aiming directly at the lead elements. Their cannon shells tore through the thin air, leaving streaks of smoke as they plunged toward the formation. Top turret gunners reacted instantly, swinging their guns upward, firing short, disciplined bursts, tracers intersected in layered arcs. One of the attackers burst into flames, spiraling downward, but others continued their run, forcing waist gunners to shift position and brace for impact. 930 hours. BF-109s joined the assault, climbing through the lower edges of the formation in steep vertical attacks designed to break cohesion. One bomber staggered as shrapnel ripped through its wing root. The pilot fought to stay in position, knowing that slipping out of formation meant near certain destruction. Gunner shouted bearings, 3 o'clock high, 12 o'clock level, 6 low, each call triggering a coordinated response from overlapping turrets. The Luftwaffe rotated fresh groups into the fight, pressing with relentless intensity. Some attackers fired rockets, hoping to scatter the formation. Others aimed for the cockpit or engines, trying to disable key bombers that anchored the combat box. Yet the wall of American fire remained dense. Endless streams of .50 caliber rounds carved glowing paths through the sky, forcing German pilots to break off or risk being caught in crossfire. 945 hours. The Regensburg force continued southeast under pounding assault. Fighters from multiple Geschwaders, which tactics, striking from the front to exploit the bomber's most vulnerable angle. Nose gunners and chin turrets roared in response, their tracers meeting the incoming fighters head-on. The air was a maelstrom of explosions, smoke trails, and fragments spinning through the formation. Crewmen held their positions despite the chaos, some working their guns with burned hands, others stepping over wounded comrades while keeping the defense alive. Still the formation held, the discipline drilled into every crewman, every pilot, every gunner kept the bombers locked together by instinct and training. Ahead lay the industrial complexes that had drawn them deep into enemy territory, and the most punishing phase of the battle was about to begin. The battlefield had reached a breaking point. Artillery thunder rolled across the valley like an unending storm, each blast shaking the earth beneath exhausted soldiers who had already pushed their bodies far past their limits. Smoke drifted low, turning the landscape into a gray, shifting maze where silhouettes appeared and vanished like ghosts. And then, the enemy counterattack finally hit. It was sudden, violent, and perfectly timed. A wave of infantry surged forward under the cover of their own guns, firing in rapid bursts as they moved between shell craters. Tanks clattered behind them, their engines growling like steel predators closing in on wounded prey. At first glance, it looked unstoppable, but the defending units were ready. They had spent hours preparing kill zones, repositioning machine guns, and calling for overlapping artillery coverage. Now, as the enemy advanced deeper, every weapon opened up at once. The air filled with the crack of rifles, the thump of mortar, and the roar of anti-tank guns firing point-blank. It wasn't a battle anymore, it was a race. Who would break first? The enemy tanks pressed forward, shrugging off the first shots, forcing their way through the ruined outskirts of the village. One tank rolled over a collapsed wall and turned its turret, ready to blast a path open. That's when a hidden anti-tank team made their move. They waited, held their breath, let the tank come dangerously close, then fired. A blazing stream struck the armor and erupted in a fireball that lit the street like a sunrise made of flame. The explosion froze the entire front for half a second, then chaos erupted again. With the road blocked by burning steel, infantry scrambled for new cover. Small unit fights broke out inside shattered houses, men fighting room to room, floor to floor. In brutal, desperate close quarters, hand grenades rolled across broken staircases, bayonets flashed in the smoke. Every corner became a battlefield of its own. Despite the carnage, the line held. But the enemy still had one more move, one more desperate push to break the defenses before their momentum collapsed. High above, reconnaissance aircraft spotted a mass of reinforcements forming on the far side of the ridge, a final reserve meant to punch through and decide the battle. The message reached headquarters within minutes. If those reinforcements reached the front, the entire defensive perimeter would collapse. So commanders made a decision that would define the battle. They unleashed everything they had left, Artillery batteries fired at maximum velocity, hurling shells so fast their barrels glowed red. Fighter bombers dropped from the sky, diving low enough for pilots to feel the shockwaves of their own explosions. The ground attack ripped into the assembling enemy reinforcements, throwing the entire formation into confusion. For the first time, the attackers hesitated, and that hesitation saved the defenders. Sensing the shift, front-line troops launched a counterattack. A final surge of adrenaline carried them forward through smoke and broken concrete. They stormed the last enemy footholds, clearing trenches and shattered homes with grim determination. What began as a battle for survival had transformed into a moment of defiant willpower. And as the enemy line finally cracked, retreating in disarray, the battlefield fell eerily silent, broken only by the distant rumble of engines pulling back into the hills. The climax was over. The fate of the battle had been decided. When the firing finally stopped, the silence felt unreal. For hours the battlefield had been a living furnace, a place where steel, fire, and human will collided without mercy. Now, only drifting smoke remained, curling upward in slow, tired spirals as if the land itself was exhaling after surviving something unimaginable. Soldiers emerged cautiously from their positions, stepping over shattered bricks, twisted metal, and cratered earth. The adrenaline that had carried them through the climax faded quickly, replaced by an overwhelming fatigue that settled deep into their bones. Many didn't speak. They simply stared at the horizon, trying to comprehend that they were still alive. Medics moved among the wounded, calling out for stretchers and trying to stabilize men who only hours earlier had charged through gunfire without hesitation. Field chaplains knelt beside those who had fallen, whispering quiet prayers drowned out by the distant rumble of retreating enemy vehicles. The village, once full of life, was now unrecognizable. Roofs had collapsed, homes were gutted by fire, and streets were carved open by tank treads and explosions. What had been a community was now a scar. But despite the devastation, the defenders had done what seemed impossible just a day earlier. They had held the line. Maps were updated at headquarters, front markers shifted, and commanders began speaking in cautious, measured tones about a turning point. The victory wasn't absolute. No battle in this war ever was, but it was decisive enough to change momentum. Captured enemy documents and prisoners revealed the truth. The attacking force had thrown nearly all its remaining reserves into that final push. Their failure left them not only blooded but strategically exposed. What was meant to be their breakthrough had instead become their breaking point. For the defenders, morale surged. Not with celebration. There was nothing to celebrate on ground like this, but with a renewed sense of resolve. They had proven to themselves that they could endure, could adapt, could fight back against overwhelming odds. That knowledge alone would influence every decision in the coming days. Engineers arrived soon after, surveying the ruins and marking safe paths through unexploded shells. The long, slow work of rebuilding began even as artillery thundered in the distance, a reminder that the war was far from finished. But for this moment, on this stretch of torn earth, the defenders stood victorious. The battle had changed the course of the campaign, and its echoes would shape the decisions, strategies, and sacrifices that followed. This battle revealed the stark reality of war, that courage and strategy are inseparable, and that even the most meticulously planned assaults can falter against discipline, resolve, and timing. Technology and firepower mattered, yet human endurance and coordination proved equally decisive. Soldiers, gunners, and commanders alike were tested not just by the enemy, but by the relentless demands of survival under fire. The smoke and ruin left behind were reminders of both sacrifice and resilience. Every decision, every calculated risk, shaped the outcome in ways that rippled far beyond the battlefield. In the skies and on the ground, this encounter illustrated the balance of preparation, innovation, and sheer human will, a testament to the cost and consequence of war. If you found this story insightful and want more cinematic, historically accurate World War II documentaries, Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a journey into history.